I agree that war is terrible, and I agree that innocent Palestinians are being killed. I agree with that because that's the objective reality. Where we disagree is what to do about it. So my attitude is, let's get the rapists and genocidal terrorists out of Gaza. They cannot control 2 million people anymore. They are terrorists. They burn Jews alive. They rape innocent Jewish women. They currently have innocent Jews and Muslims in captivity in terror dungeons underneath Gaza. The solution is not for Israel to put down their weapons, because in no war in human history can the aggressor start dictating the terms of a ceasefire. That's not how war works. If you truly want peace, you would demand that Hamas lays down its weapons immediately. You would demand that Hamas returns all of the hostages immediately, because that will end the war. And I remember saying this in a Harvard group chat when they were planning on doing a protest and ceasefire now in the apartheid regime. And I said those exact words. Why don't you call for Hamas to return the 1-year-old baby that they have in their terror dungeons? And you know what the response from Harvard students was?
This is Listening to Understand, where sensitive Jewish truth seekers gather in a safe place for candid conversations on challenging topics. When we listen to truly understand and not in order to respond, we can replace judgment with curiosity and open our hearts to every Jew, regardless of their personal choices. As Socrates said, the unexamined life is not worth living. I'm Atana. Let's get started.
Shabbos Kestenbaum is a graduate student at Harvard University researching the intersections between public policy and contemporary Jewish life in the United States. Shabbos is the lead plaintiff against Harvard University, alleging pervasive and systematic antisemitism. Shabbos appears regularly on CNN, Fox News, and the New York Times, and has testified in front of the United States Congress, among other forums, to advocate for the American Jewish community. Currently, Shabbos is working with Congress to pass major pieces of legislation to combat anti-Semitism. Although this episode was recorded before Purim, March 2024, we felt it appropriate to publish it today on Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day, observed in Israel as a day of commemoration of the approximately 6 million Jews murdered in the Holocaust, and a day to specifically commemorate and recognize anti-Semitism throughout the ages.
Thank you for joining me here today on Listening to Understand podcast. Shabbos, thank you for joining me here all the way from Harvard. Let's give myself and the audience a little bit of a background. I want to be educated about what's really going on in college campuses when it comes to anti-Semitism. It's a big buzzword now. Growing up, I'm double your age. I've been hearing about it a lot, but now the stories are coming out more than ever. What really is going on behind the scenes. Give us a little bit of a background, what you're in Harvard for, how long you're there for, and just give us like a little taste what happened before October 7th and if there was a radical change after October 7th. Let's go from the beginning. You grew up in Riverdale.
I grew up in Riverdale. I'm one of 7. I'm a first-generation American, so my parents are both from London. My dad started the first auction house in America specializing in rare Judaica, rare Jewish books. So I grew up in a house where quite literally every single wall was covered in 16th century, 17th century old Jewish books. And that sense of appreciation for Jewish history, for Jewish culture and Jewish wisdom was ingrained within me really from a very young age. As I said, being a first generation American, I was also raised to be proud of that, to be proud of my American identity. And I never saw those two as a contradiction. I thought they were quite complementary, and I continue to think that they're complementary, and I'm proud of both aspects of my Jewishness and my Americanness. I went to Israel for 2 years. I lived in Jerusalem, studied at Yeshivat Eshet Torah. When I came back to the U.S., I decided I would forgo college temporarily, and instead I would begin formal Jewish education. So I started teaching at the local Jewish day school. I then took a position with the National Council of Synagogue Youth, NCSY. I was a city director in Westchester. So I was working with unaffiliated public school teenagers, really talking about Jewish identity, Jewish values. I started college, COVID hit, so it all happened online, and I finished it rather quickly because of that. And then as I was discerning what I wanted to do professionally, it dawned on me that I wanted to explore my Jewish religion from a completely secular, completely academic background. And that's where this idea of Harvard Divinity School popped in. I applied, didn't think much of it. And lo and behold, I was accepted. I found out I got accepted when I was in Auschwitz-Birkenau, which is a interesting
Wow.
story maybe for later. But I was really passionate that this is so incredible that I can share my Orthodox identity with non-Orthodox, non-Jewish students, and at the same time, receive so much more than I give. And I was so looking forward to that opportunity. And quite quickly, I started in September of 2022. I realized that as much as I wanted to focus on my research, on my studies, my classes, the things that animated me and motivated me to apply to Harvard in the beginning, I slowly realized that there was this undercurrent of genteel anti-Semitism. So I'll give you a great example. My very first month of being at Harvard, Palestine Solidarity Committee invited a speaker by the name of Muhammad al-Kurd to come to campus. Was actually his second time coming on campus. This is a guy who frequently appears on the Anti-Defamation League top 10 anti-Semites. This is a guy who believes and says that Jews eat the organs of Palestinians, that the Israeli occupying forces have internalized the ways of Nazi Germany. And if you have Twitter, he's the same guy who 2 weeks ago lamented the fact that you can't hijack planes anymore. So he's a deranged anti-Semite and he's a terrorist supporter. So when I and other Jewish students went to the Harvard administration and the Harvard president to say that this is someone who actively puts Jews in danger, the reason we did that is because, rightly or wrongly, and we could talk about this later, Harvard has a very long and a very strong track record of disciplining speech that they find hurtful, offensive, and derogatory, of rescinding invitations to speakers who they believe put students' lives in danger. So all we were asking was, Harvard, use the same policies that you have done with other minority groups when it comes to Jews. And the answer we got was fascinating. It was a shrug of the shoulder, and everyone is entitled to free speech. And again, Harvard's not wrong. Everyone is entitled to free speech. The problem is, as I addressed, Harvard has never taken this approach before. The University of Chicago, for example, has been very clear since October 7th, and really before that we are not going to comment on international events, and we are not going to rescind invitations for objectionable speakers, because we believe that the place of academia and the university is to have these difficult conversations, which is one approach. And Harvard takes the opposite approach. Harvard says, no, we are going to regulate speech. We are going to rescind invitations. But the only exception was Jews. It was fascinating to see this double standard play out in real time.
They didn't see the hypocrisy when you pointed it out to them?
They did not see the hypocrisy. And to this day, after we filed the lawsuit, after we appeared in front of Congress, after we appear on the national media, they still haven't acknowledged and recognized this double standard. And let's be absolutely clear. This double standard is anti-Semitic. And as we will prove in court, it is absolutely illegal. Harvard cannot treat Jews differently than other minority groups or really any other student group. But it is objectively the case, and we'll talk about the lawsuit later on, but it is objectively the case, if you read our lawsuit, that you walk away with an appreciation and of a feeling of, yes, it is clear that Jews and Jewish student group are in fact treated differently.
Did you really feel a threat going to that speech? Did you want to make a statement, or did you really feel a threat if somebody anti-Semitic comes and gives a speech?
Whether I personally felt a threat or not, I don't want to say it's irrelevant, but the fact of the matter is there was a significant amount of Jewish students who, yes, very much felt threat. This is Muhammad al-Kurd said literally a month ago during a rally in London. He said that we have to, quote, normalize massacres. So I can understand why Jews would feel that they need to hide their identity or they need to not go to class that day because they have classmates or they have professors who are encouraging this type of rhetoric. Me personally, I've always been a bit more outspoken and more eager to confront those who I view to be in the wrong. And when Muhammad al-Kurd did come to campus, I, along with many other Jewish students, protested outside. So I'm not particularly one to shy away from a fight. But at the same time, that doesn't mean because I'm okay with it, that therefore we can ignore the fact that Jewish students are not feeling safe and are not feeling comfortable. And again, if this was a university that never really took those considerations into account, that would be one thing. But Harvard has done the opposite. Harvard very much takes into account the feelings and the attitudes and the behaviors of their students.
So give me a little bit of a background. What happens with students just on a day-to-day basis? Can you walk around with your kippah? Do you choose to walk around with kippah? Do others do?
Again, I personally have always taken the approach that I am never going to apologize for other people's bigotry, discrimination, and hatred. I like giving this example. If someone wants to throw a rock through my window, okay, it'll be annoying that I have to repair the window, but ultimately, I'm not the one who needs to apologize. I'm not the one who will be held accountable in a court of law or in the court of public opinion. So after October 7th, I don't know if you can see it, but I bought a much larger kippah, actually. I'm incredibly proud to be Jewish. I'm incredibly proud to be an American, and I'm not ashamed to admit that. At the same time, I know for a fact that there are Jewish students who don't wear kippahs anymore. I know for a fact that there are Jewish students who don't wear the Star of David necklace anymore. There are real security concerns. I had private armed security outside my house for 3 days about a month ago when a Harvard
Really
threatened me and taunted me with a machete. So the threats are real, and I can certainly recognize why people want to change their behaviors. But as I said, I have every right to be here at Harvard. I have every right as an American citizen not to be intimidated or bullied or ostracized. And if people want to make an uncomfortable environment for me, then I'm going to make their life pretty uncomfortable because I'm not going to go anywhere and I'm not going to stop speaking out.
What are other students doing to help you on your mission right now? And then we're going to go into the mission. And how did you decide what to do next?
Yeah, so I'll start with the first part of the question. I will be honest, in full transparency. There is a divide, a large divide, I would say, in the Jewish community here at Harvard between not just how do we proceed with combating and dealing with anti-Semitism, but there are also a significant amount of Jews here who don't recognize the problem. There are Jews at Harvard, what are they called? Jewish Voices for Palestine, I think they're called. There are three. The Harvard Law School has the Tzedek Association, Harvard Divinity School has the Jews for Liberation, and now there's the Harvard Jews for Palestine. So 3 groups comprised of Jews who give validity and rationale and almost justification for the anti-Semitic protesters. Because these Jews on campus will say, I'm incidentally Jewish, and I also believe that the Intifada should be globalized. And so you have some really bad faith actors out there who listen to those Jews and say, great, that gives me the license to now also yell for the globalization of the Intifada. So that's an extreme example, but it happens to be the case that there are Jews on this campus who believe that calling for an intifada, forget about, is not anti-Semitic, but it is an acceptable thing to be yelling at other Jewish students. So that's an extreme example. On a more nuanced, less extreme narrative, there are Jews who certainly believe that there is a problem with anti-Semitism. They've experienced it themselves. Their approach has not been to be confrontational. Don't file lawsuits. Don't criticize the university publicly, but let's work with the university. There is a second iteration of the anti-Semitism task force currently, and many students have taken the approach, this is our best chance to create real, meaningful, and long-lasting change. I and the 5 other plaintiffs, and also a significant amount of the Jewish community here at Harvard, have taken a third approach, which is we tried working with them, we tried reasoning with them, but anti-Semitism is here, it's pervasive, it's systemic, and the only thing that we can do to create long-lasting change is outside public pressure, is putting Harvard in an uncomfortable spotlight. It is not working with them anymore because we must recognize that this is an institution that is so morally bankrupt at its core that there is no one truly that we can work with. So there are many different approaches. It's a diverse community, not necessarily a large community, but an ideologically diverse one. And it's very difficult to be a Jew, certainly a pro-Israel Jew, of which, of course, 85% of American Jewry is. So these are not easy times to be a Jewish student on a college campus, much less Harvard.
Did any student say, if it's not going to change, we're going to leave? Are you willing to give up your Harvard badge of honor, which it is a badge of honor, and say, you know what, if you're not going to accommodate me, I'm going to leave? And they might say, I'll spread out the red carpet. Please, here's the door.
Yeah.
Will they say that?
So I was just on the phone with him today. I'm not going to say his name, but he was accepted to one of the grad programs here at Harvard this week, and he turned them down, and he specifically cited the pervasive anti-Semitism on campus. I know of at least one student who is taking the semester off. In terms of whether people should just drop out, I can understand that rationale. I really do. And I think that if October 7th and the aftermath of it happened when I was a first semester freshman, I don't know if I would have dropped out. I certainly would have taken a leave of absence. But at the same time, I realize, and I'm trying to say this without sounding arrogant or rude, but I realize I have a platform. It's a small platform, but it's a platform nonetheless. And I know that if I'm not there, there are no obvious candidates who will fill that void or take on that platform. And I think, again, I'm not trying to sound arrogant or braggadocious in any way, but if I wasn't there, I don't think we would have filed a lawsuit. I don't think Harvard would be in the news as much as it is because I, along with...
Why is it arrogant versus grateful for you as a...
No, I'm not the shaliach. I'm doing the bare minimum. And I'm doing this together with many other students, 100%.
So what part would you think that anybody would think is arrogant? And if anything, it's thank you for...
I don't need the thanks. Trust me. I'm just trying to make the point of, I'll give you an example. The lawsuit, which is, I believe, an incredibly important step forward, I'm the only named plaintiff. And I don't like that fact because it put a lot of pressure on me. It means that I have to be the voice for a lot of other students. And I wish that other students would speak out and put their names to the incidents. But for many valid and totally fair reasons, they don't want to be. So all that means is it adds an extra level of responsibility that I have to carry. And I know if I were to just say that the institution is corrupt and I want nothing more to do with it, as I said, there aren't so many obvious candidates who would fill that void. So I'm not particularly enjoying my time here. It's great speaking with you, but at the same time, I don't like the fact that I have to alert people to the dangers of anti-Semitism on college campuses. But as I said, these are uncharted waters. These are very dangerous times. And if no one else is going to speak out, and if no one else is going clearly articulate to the public, to the media, to government officials, just how bad the problem is, then I will have to do it. And that's what I have been doing.
So I'm understanding that there's like a few different groups. There's the far left, the middle that says, okay, let's negotiate. Let's find some solution. Let's not make a lot of noise. Let's try to find a solution. And then there's you and people that are joining you, which is a small group of the Jews that are saying, listen, the negotiations are not going to work. It's just not going to work. So we need to do a root canal here and just really go, right? Because you're saying there's no one to talk to and they're not really listening to understand. They're not listening to change. There's a fundamental belief here that what's happening is okay. And they're even giving the right to it. Is that it? Is that what you're saying? That the Harvard is built on these beliefs that it's okay?
It's hard for me to speculate, but what I can say is let's look at the last 5 months to build precedent here. If Harvard wanted to change, they would have done it. There's nothing preventing them from implementing policies that combat anti-Semitism. There's nothing preventing them from disciplining students today who have engaged in anti-Semitism. And Harvard knows who they are because we told them exactly who they are. If Harvard wants to appease this radical, loud, angry, anti-Western, anti-higher education, anti-Semitic crowd, they're doing it. Just today, there was a protest in one of the buildings at the Smith Center, and it was about 100 people, let's say, most of them wearing masks to cover their identities. And they had a mock funeral, a wake, a vigil for the 30,000 Palestinians who are trapped in the Al-Shifa hospital. And again, where are they getting these numbers from? That's besides the point. But these are students who are not particularly interested in dialogue and debate and multi-narratives. They're really interested in their preconceived notions and of being as outlandish and against school policy and against Western values as they can. And for whatever reason, Harvard has decided that this is the institution that is the best place for that type of activism, let's say. So as I said, if they wanted to change, if they wanted to help us, they could have done it already. They could have done it already. And that sort of explains the community or the thought group that I'm behind, which is we tried all we could. Now we have to resort to drastic tactics.
And that's, what did you decide to do?
Number one, the lawsuit. Number two is we are very...
Can you just you'll elaborate about what the lawsuit is? I want to understand it better.
Sure. So the lawsuit was something in the works since late October, early November. There has been a tsunami of anti-Semitism, not just at Harvard, but across college campuses in the United States. And students have been using their constitutional rights to hold these institutions of anti-Semitism accountable in a court of law. And primarily, we are fixating on Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. Title VI prohibits discrimination, especially from institutions that receive federal funding, but prohibits discrimination on the basis of things like national origin. And the Trump administration and the Biden administration, and I even think the Obama administration, have defined national origin in a way that encompasses and includes Jewish people, because Judaism is not just a religion. It's also a nationality. It's also an ethnicity. Judaism can mean a lot of different things. And we realized quite quickly after October 7th that we have a legal claim. Now, I think it's very important for people to contextualize the fact that as we were in discussions with legal teams, we were cognizant of the fact and quite open that should Harvard change course and should things calm down a bit and there be policies that are enforced where Harvard commits to combating anti-Semitism, we wouldn't file the lawsuit because there would be no need. And as I said in the beginning, we didn't want to do it. This is not a natural thing for a student to be doing. To sue your own university is quite drastic.
Right.
And it's quite emotionally taxing, and it takes up a significant amount of your time, and it puts you in an uncomfortable public spotlight. But we had no other choice. We had the anti-Semitism task force, which we'll talk about later. I emailed them 40 plus times, haven't heard a single response. We had really
not one.
Not one. Actually, no. After I spoke in front of Congress on live TV, within 2 hours, they emailed me back. So as long as I go back to Congress and speak in front of live TV with 24 Congress members, then they'll email me. So we had not just that, but Claudine Gay said in front of Congress that calls for genocide against Jewish people can be appropriate as long as it's context dependent. As a Jewish person hearing this, having the total moral abdication of leadership and ethics and values is so stunning that we were forced into this position where we can't work with these people because they're either unable or unwilling to A, recognize the problem, or B, fix the problem. So I don't like the fact that we've taken this approach of we have to be public and we have to criticize and we have to be angry. But if you have a better option that can lead to concrete results, let's do that. But I just don't think that exists.
Did they come to try to do a resolution after you appeared in Congress?
Of course not. Harvard wants to drag this whole issue out as long as possible, hoping that the public's attention will be diverted. There will be a new presidential administration that doesn't focus on this as much, and that the makeup of Congress will be one whereby the current majority no longer has the influence they do on the House Committee on Education and the Workforce. As I said from the beginning, if Harvard wanted to change, they could have done it. For the first month or so, we were telling Harvard exactly what they should do. These are the policies that you should enforce. These are the things that you need to be saying. This is the condemnation that you need to be writing about. And they just blatantly ignored us. I think it's very telling. And I'm not sure how public this is, but when Claudine Gay was preparing for her eventual disastrous congressional testimony, she did not take the advice of a single Jewish person. The only people she consulted were her legal team. And look where that led. But she had an advisory group with pretty smart people, David Walpe, Dara Horn, and she didn't even bother to ask them or consult with them. So Harvard wants...
I think it was very clear that they wanted to make a clear statement when she went to speak that they're not going to stop anything. It was very clear. And for the world, I think it was for the Jewish world that's fighting anti-Semitism, it was so good to hear that the students are not making it up.
Yeah.
It was like a testimony here. It's from the mouth.
Exactly.
Can you get any more? It was like, wow. It was shocking. And at the same time, okay, we're not crazy.
Yeah. I'm glad you say that, because we have, as the current co-chair of the new anti-Semitism task force, a professor who has gone on the record multiple times saying that anti-Semitism at Harvard is, quote, exaggerated, or that it's a form of, quote, social exclusion. So someone who doesn't actually believe in the problem of anti-Semitism is now in charge of combating that very thing. Claudine Gay, as terrible as she was, a gift. Why? For exactly the reasons you just espoused, because she was so open with her naked anti-Semitism, with her unvarnished apathy and shrugging of the shoulder when it came to calls for the genocide of Jewish people. So
it was a clear hypocrisy, clear mission driven.
Yeah. So we were actually very appreciative that there was someone who was so incompetent, so bad, and so ignorant as Claudine Gay, who could basically prove our point that we're not making this up, we're not exaggerating, and there is no one at Harvard, at the top at least, who's helping us, which again solidified why we needed to take the drastic steps that we did. So the lawsuit is one of them, going on and speaking with national media and criticizing the institution, writing op-eds and posting on social media. There's a whole effort of every day we're trying to put as much material out there to expose not only what's happening, but to also gain public support and attention. These are all things that we don't particularly enjoy doing, but we find it incredibly necessary because it's not just about Harvard And it's not just about me and the 5 other plaintiffs. It's about a whole generation of young American Jews who are afraid of going to institutions of higher learning, and that is completely unacceptable in the United States of America. Completely unacceptable.
It wouldn't happen for anyone else.
Correct. I remember when George Floyd was murdered in the summer of, I think it was 2020 or 2021. I remember Harvard was so clear immediately that this was a horrific incident, which it was, and that this clearly proved that there is systemic racism in the country, and that Harvard as a university will do all that they can to rid themselves of systemic racism from their campus and from their institution. Where was that moral clarity? Where was that insightful and clear and sharp condemnation on October 7th? Where was it? When Russia
Where was anything? Where was any mention?
Right. When Russia invaded Ukraine, Harvard quite quickly put up the Ukrainian flag and put up a statement condemning the rise of fascism. When Roe v. Wade was overturned, Harvard quite quickly put all their mental health professionals on standby. When affirmative action was overturned, Harvard within an hour had a polished professional video condemning the Supreme Court ruling. On the night of October 7th, when 34 student groups published a horrific anti-Semitic statement blaming Jews for the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, there was radio silence from Harvard for the first 4 or 5 days. When they did speak about what was happening, they did not condemn Hamas, and they certainly did not condemn the 34 student groups. Only after, when Claudine Gay was pushed into a corner, she condemned Hamas, but really said nothing about the almost 1,000 students who believe that it is appropriate, and if anything, it is admirable to blame Jews as they're being murdered for their own murder. The best she came up with was 34 student groups don't necessarily speak for the entirety of the university. The lack of moral clarity when it comes to Jews is obvious, and more importantly, it's frightening, and it has serious implications for the national electorate, because rightly or wrongly, what happens at Harvard matters for the United States. And if we have leaders at the very top who cannot condemn unequivocally anti-Semitism and Jew hatred, then we are deeply in the wrong place right now as a country.
What do you think is behind it? Is it funding? Is it all business, do you think? Do you think that they care in their heart? I always wondered, if you took them aside, heart to heart, friend to friend, at a bar, what do you think they really believe? Or is it really who gives more money? Who do we have to please? Who do we have to shut down in order to keep Harvard going with our mission?
There are 2 questions that I get asked basically on a daily basis that I still don't really have a good answer for. The first one is what you just asked, and the second one is how many Jews are at Harvard. But in terms of that, it's a really good question, because the people they pissed off, Ken Griffin, Bill Ackman, these are people who gave Ken Griffin gave $300 million last year.
Yeah.
I don't understand what Harvard's long-term game plan is, what their strategy is, because let's remember, the students who are interrupting classrooms to yell for the globalization of the Intifada, or from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, or from the water to the water, Palestine will be Arab, or which is their new favorite one, or resistance is justified when people are occupied. These students do not like Harvard. They accuse it of being complicit in a genocide, of being racist, of silencing the voices of the oppressed. They're not going to be your donors in 10 years' time who reminisce about the joyous walks they took in Harvard Yard. They're anti-democratic, they're anti-Western, they're anti-Semitic, they violate school policy basically on a daily basis. So the question is, why is Harvard so emphatic that we're not going to discipline them in any way, and we're not going to condemn them in any way? It's a good question. I just...
What is it? Like, it's mind-boggling.
It is. And I think I was just at a...
Who do they hate so much, or who do they love more? Is it Me'avat Mordechai or Misinat Haman? Which one is it?
It's funny you say that. I was just I was giving a lecture in Canada a couple of days ago, and someone brought up a fascinating point about the fact that Purim is coming up in a week. And there's so many parallels between the story of Purim and the anti-Semitism on college campus, namely that of this irrational nature to it. Haman didn't have an explicit or obvious reason to hate Mordechai and the Jewish people, but he just did. And what's happening at all these universities is you can't quite articulate why it is that, maybe not the students, but at least the university, it's just so irrational how they've reacted to all of it. Claudine Gay would still have her job, and I would not be talking to you if she just simply said on October 8th, the violence in Gaza and Israel is horrific. We condemn Hamas, and we condemn the 34 student groups who so inappropriately and offensively blame Jews for the murder. That's literally it. And she didn't have to then go to Hillel and Chabad for Shabbat dinner and pretend that she loves us all. She just had to do that. It was so simple. And we told her this. We told her office. We said, please, we want to help you. Just do these things.
It's a little bit offensive that she did that, by the way. I just want to off the record.
Yeah. Is it?
Don't you think?
I think she is someone who realized how poorly she messed up.
I don't think so. I think you're giving her so much credit. Look, I think she needed to save the face of Harvard and she needed to repair damage. I don't think she cared.
It's possible. I'm not going to speculate what her intentions are. What I can do is, again, look at the past, look at the things she said. So when she resigned, and by resigned, she was fired, she wrote this, I don't know what to call it, bizarre, inflammatory, gaslighting op-ed in the New York Times, where she blamed racism, where she blamed a, quote, way-laid trap in Congress. She blamed everyone but herself. She refused to take responsibility for the division she caused on campus. She refused to apologize to Jewish people, but it was about her. It was about the horrible threats that she has faced. And again, I'm sorry she faced that. That's terrible, and people shouldn't threaten her. But number one, welcome to a day in the life of a Jew. I get death threats every week at this point.
Right.
And number two, recognize, have the humility to appreciate that this is entirely self-inflicted. The plagiarism, the anti-Semitism, the lack of a backbone, you did this to yourself. And the fact that her parting words was this public op-ed in the New York Times, blaming as many other people as she could, was, look, it's water under the bridge, but it was so infuriating. At least leave with dignity. And she couldn't even do that. And of course, she's getting paid to this day $900,000. And the last I heard, which was about a week ago, she's still living in the president's house. She hasn't moved out yet. So I have very little sympathy for her. The sympathies that I have are with Jewish students.
I think she's still working behind the scenes.
I can't speculate on that. But again, I will say the focus should always be on the students. The students are the ones who are the real victims. The students are the ones who are facing this type of BS every single day. And that's where the attention should always be, on the students, not on the enablers.
Taking a break for a few seconds to give you a quick announcement. If you haven't joined our Listening to Understand WhatsApp community, please do so now. There's a link in the show notes. We're going to be sharing more exciting stuff only for the members of the Listening to Understand WhatsApp community. See you there. When firms were saying that if they don't address anti-Semitism in Harvard, they won't hire anyone that graduated. Was there such a statement that if they,
that's correct.
Jewish firms were saying that
not
they won't hire?
No, not just Jewish.
Oh, not Jewish. So educate me, because I'm not sure what it was, but I heard something about that.
Some of the top law firms in the country, I believe it was right after the congressional testimony, or
it was right after.
It was right after. They put out a shared document and a shared statement saying that we are not going to recruit students from Harvard University. To be fair, I think they also included other universities, but again, I would have to be fact-checked on that. But they said at least Harvard University, we're not going to recruit unless you seriously condemn the rise of anti-Semitism, because they were quite smart. They said, we would never tolerate this behavior and this conduct in the workforce. You try any of this in the office and you are out of the door by 5 p.m.
Yeah.
But of course, in the world of academia at Harvard University, it's a 180. These things are promoted. These things are normalized. These things are encouraged. So yes, there was an effort, and the offer is still out there, that if Harvard does not combat anti-Semitism in a systemic and comprehensive way, we're not going to hire graduates from the school. And that's tough, but I think it's warranted.
Do you believe that?
Yeah, I think absolutely it's warranted.
Really? Is it going to, like in 10 years, they're going to still keep to it?
Hang on. If in 10 years, Jews at Harvard are still scared to walk with a kippah, then not hiring Harvard graduates is the least of our problems. And this is someone that's about to be a Harvard graduate. And if a firm looks at me, and actually, I was going to say something, but I'll leave it to the end. If a firm looks at me and they say, we have serious reservations about the university you associate yourself with, you have to explain yourself. I can totally understand that. Absolutely. And I think that's where the change will commence from. It will start when these firms say we're not hiring until change is made, or donors saying we're not giving until change is made.
I think I'm wondering if the donors is a bigger impact.
Probably. Look, Liz McGill of Penn, she also gave disastrous testimony. And why was she fired so quickly? I think there are a couple of reasons, but the main one is there was a $150 million donation that was in the process of being donated. And the donor pulled back and said, I'm not giving you a penny until Liz McGill is gone. And lo and behold, the next morning, Liz McGill was out of a job. Does money talk?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Problem is, Harvard has so much money. They're endowed.
That's what I was questioning. They have so much money. They need the few $100 million or whatever that they're getting.
So there is a roughly $50 billion endowment. But number one, that is not liquid assets. Number two, Harvard, and I encourage your listeners to Google this because you can find a better explanation than I can give right now, but they are trying to restructure their debts. They need to have liquid cash on hand. There is a dry run at the moment of donors. The question is, will that last? Alan Garber, who's the current interim president, he has not met with me. He has not met privately with any Jewish student that I'm aware of. What he has been doing today, yesterday, in the past couple of days is meeting with high-profile donors in London and high-profile donors in Florida, including Ken Griffin, the guy who gave $300 million last year. Garber and Harvard University recognize that there is a real need to shore up support and to solidify their donor base. But at the end of the day, if we hold firm, if we don't tower, and I say we, it's not like I'm getting $300 million, but the Bill Ackmans and the Ken Griffins and the Alan Dershowitzes, if they can remain steadfast and keep the pressure in terms of financial pressure, then I do think Harvard will correct it.
What was your feedback from Congress? How did it go?
So I want to reiterate that it was a bipartisan committee. And I think that's really important for people to internalize because in an era of hyperpartisanship, in an era of congressional dysfunction, this is something that animates both parties. They are disgusted. They are appalled at the way Jews are being treated. And in fact, Representative Owens, who is a Black Republican congressman from Utah, he said, I believe, the most damning but also moving testimony during that whole day. He said that he grew up under segregation in the United States. And while Jews are not experiencing what Blacks in the United States have, for sure, I'm not making that comparison, and neither was the representative making that comparison. What he did say is, I recognize bullies, and I recognize people who want to pit us against each other by class, by race, by religion, and I recognize when hatred and discrimination and bigotry is normalized, and I'm seeing that right now. And that was so powerful to hear that from a United States congressman, especially one who he himself faced horrific discrimination. And he is doing everything in his power to make sure that Jews and Blacks and women and the LGBTQ plus community, anyone and everyone does not face the hatred that he faced as a Black man in the United States. So the feedback was incredible. Elise Stefanik, Virginia Fox, who I may not have necessarily allied myself with ideologically, have nevertheless been such staunch supporters. The House Ways and Means Committee have called me. We've spoken about practical steps forward. All of the congressional staffers have been in touch with me as follow-up. I met with the Department of Justice, Department of Education, the Helsinki Commission, my own Congressman Richie Torres, who's not even on the committee. We had a meeting with him. So the feedback has just been so overwhelming, and it inspires so much of us young people, because in a time where we're not getting treated with respect and with fairness, the United States Congress has really been so welcoming and so angry to hear what we are going through.
And what are they suggesting until there's a resolution? If you're saying that you think Harvard is going to push this on as long as possible, you're saying maybe even years, right?
It could be. Congress has already issued subpoenas to Harvard, quite extensive subpoenas, and Harvard is obligated to respond to them. Now, it's true they're dragging their feet and they're trying to run out the clock. But nevertheless, they have to respond to these subpoenas. In our lawsuit, we will hold them accountable in a court of law. So they will also have to respond to the things that we request from them. And then, as I said, the best thing is public pressure. If Harvard is being put in an uncomfortable spotlight every day, and you have a bipartisan committee of congressmen and women who are tarnishing Harvard and all these other elite institutions, tarnishing their reputation, that will force Harvard to act. And that's what I will say to you and to all your listeners and to all your viewers. Keep the pressure on. Don't let up, because that's what Harvard's waiting for. Harvard is waiting for the story to die down. They're waiting for the Jews
for the next hot topic to come up,
or for the Jews to either graduate or to move on to something else. And that's why it's so critical that as the months turn into years, we remain as steadfast and vigilant and as upset as we were on the night of October 7th.
What do you think happened 10 years ago, 20 years ago? Have you spoken to any students? And has anyone reached out to you that was a Harvard graduate student 20, 30 years ago? And they're like, wow, good for you, because we went through the same anti-Semitism but we didn't do anything.
Absolutely. There's actually the Harvard Jewish Alumni Association, which was established after October 7th, who have been so welcoming and so supportive and have told me exactly what you just said. We faced this too, but we didn't really know what our options were. We faced this too, but we didn't feel that anyone would care. And let's remember, there was systemic discrimination against Jews dating back decades ago. President Lowell had official quotas on how many Jews were allowed to be admitted into Harvard University. He's also someone who was an avid supporter of the Nazis. He was also someone who avidly tried to get the Jews already on campus to leave. So the systemic discrimination goes back not just to October 7th, but years and years. And our lawsuit, which I encourage everyone to read, does quite a good job at painting a very broad picture of anti-Semitism, not just, as I said, of the last year or two, but of the last decades.
Who's helping you with this writing the lawsuit? You're going against the top of the top. Like, it's scary.
Very scary. Actually, one caveat I'll say is if the legal team that helped Claudine Gay with her congressional testimony is the same legal team representing Harvard, then I'm not scared at all. But assuming they got better legal counsel, then yes, I'm scared. But we're being represented by Kasowitz, which is an aggressive litigation firm based in New York. They are no strangers to this. They've been advocate for Jewish students on college campuses and anti-discrimination lawsuits for years. We're very fortunate to have them representing us. We are very fortunate for them amplifying our voices. And above all, we're very fortunate for the fight that they are waging for us in the courts.
So they're doing it like as a charity case? They're saying on behalf of the Jews, or you have to pay them?
How
does it work?
We pay them. We have, thankfully...
Because I can't even imagine the fees that are going to be...
Yeah, no, the fees are quite significant. We do have people who are donating. And if your listeners
are backing you up.
Yeah, there are people backing us up. If your listeners want to be generous, they can certainly reach out to me and I can point them in the right direction. But we have generous supporters who not just donate their financial resources, but donate their love and support. And it's incredibly appreciated.
That's so nice. That's so nice to hear that there's people that are saying, you know what, there's a young 25-year-old and a few other students. Let's help them out and let's guide them and let's support them. That's very beautiful. Do you believe that these protesters on college campuses know history, or they're mimicking social media? Do you actually have conversations with them to see how much they know?
I know many of them from class. I know many of them from social media. I know many of them from passing them in the hallways. I can't say with full confidence that most of them are well educated or well versed on the subject. There was a Wall Street Journal article that came out about a month ago that found that about half of young people who scream from a river to the sea aren't actually sure what river and aren't actually sure what sea they're referring to. Some people said, oh, the Red Sea. I think if you were to ask the average white liberal keffiyeh-wearing protester how many Arab citizens live in Israel or what percentage of them enjoy equal rights, you would get an answer around 0. Many of them have never been to Israel before. Many of them have not spoken to Zionists before because many of them have policies that we don't normalize Zionists. So on principle, they won't speak to us. I can totally respect and understand that people have different ideological viewpoints. I get that, I respect that, and I want that. Problem is, so many of these protesters and so many of these students do not want to engage in debate. They don't want to talk or validate opinions that they don't like. It's very difficult to see how students have just pigeonholed themselves into their own ideological corner, and they refuse to come out, not to change even, but just to respond to questions, just to talk about their stances. I get the grief. I get especially if you're a Palestinian. These are terrible times. War is horrendous. No one wants innocent civilians to die. No one. But for all the people chanting ceasefire, there was a ceasefire on October 7th. How does the ceasefire guarantee the release of the Israeli hostages, including 8 American citizens? How does the ceasefire, which keeps Hamas in place, how does that protect the innocent people of Gaza? And how does that protect the innocent people of Israel? So when you ask these questions, you realize that there's not a lot of substance behind their sloganeering. And it's deeply unfortunate.
What else are you doing to hopefully change history? At least on
do my laundry? I don't know. Look, I don't see what I'm doing. And I'm not trying to sound modest. I'm being honest. I don't see what I'm doing as changing history. I don't see what I'm doing as being brave. I don't see what I'm doing as taking a courageous stance. I see it as doing what any person in my situation would do. And that is call out bigotry, call out hatred, call out discrimination. Whether it's racism, whether it's homophobia, whether it's sexism, whether it's anti-Semitism. I'm a progressive. I remember proudly marching with Black Lives Matter. And I even remember saying that we're not talking all lives matter. We're talking about Black lives because there's systemic racism. And yes, it's true that all lives matter, but right now we're talking about the African American community. So too, I believe that there's systemic anti-Semitism. And yes, it's true. There's all kinds of hatred and prejudice and discrimination. Right now, we're talking about the Jews because their lives matter. And
but they'll say Palestinians' life matter.
Absolutely.
Look what's going on in Gaza. Look what's the oppressiveness, like the other side that they'll say. You said it before, that Harvard brought it on to themselves, right? Like basically, they called for all the donors to pull out. They basically invited this anger and retaliation against them, right? The same thing people are saying. Israel asked for it. What would you answer them?
I agree that war.
You agree?
I agree that war is terrible, and I agree that innocent Palestinians are being killed. I agree with that because that's the objective reality. Where we disagree is what to do about it. So my attitude is, let's get the rapists and genocidal terrorists out of Gaza. They cannot, forget about, they cannot live. They cannot control 2 million people anymore. They are terrorists. Right. They burn Jews alive. They rape innocent Jewish women. They currently have innocent Jews and Muslims in captivity in terror dungeons underneath Gaza. The solution is not for Israel to put down their weapons, because in no war in human history can the aggressor start dictating the terms of a ceasefire. That's not how war works. If you truly want peace, you would demand that Hamas lays down its weapons immediately. You would demand that Hamas lays down and returns all of the hostages immediately, because that will end the war. And I remember saying this in a Harvard group chat when they were planning on doing a protest and ceasefire now and the apartheid regime this. And I said those exact words. Why don't you call for Hamas to return the 1-year-old baby that they have in their terror dungeons? And you know what the response from Harvard students was? They kicked me out of the group chat.
Wow.
That's the level of intellectual discourse at America's highest university. That is the level of rhetoric and tolerance for a multitude of perspectives and differing ideologies. When someone says something you don't like, just kick them out. Just ignore them. That is the approach.
Cancel. It's the cancel culture. Yes. I can't tolerate a debate.
Yeah.
I can't tolerate a conversation. I'm going to kick you out.
Yeah, exactly. That's the approach of Harvard University students. So if we want to engage in political discourse, if we want to exchange in the free exercise of ideas, let's do it. But let's not pretend that's what's happening in Harvard. What is happening at Harvard is bullies, is thugs, is people who cover their faces and yell, Palestine will be Arab, and globalize the intifada, and there is only one solution, intifada revolution, and resistance is justified. These are not people who are interested in debate. These are people who will tell you they are interested in the destruction and the dismantling of the Jewish state. That is all they care about.
Do you really think that they believe that Hamas was right to attack Israel?
It's not, do I believe that's what they think? They say it.
No, I know they say it. I know they say it. But are they saying it? There's this saying in Hebrew, Kol Hagana ze hatkafa, Kol hatkafa ze Hagana. Like, in order to protect yourself, you have to blame. Are they doing that? Or they're like, oh, you called for it. Listen, guys, you oppressed 2 million Gazians. What do you want to do?
I cannot speculate.
Gabor Mate and Daniel Mate are saying it's a trauma reaction.
I cannot speculate the internal motivations of individuals, but I can judge them on what they put out in the marketplace of ideas. And I can judge them on what they're willing to say publicly. Those are the measurements in which I can create an opinion. And based on those two metrics, I can say unequivocally that these are students who support Hamas and the Houthis and Hezbollah, and they support armed resistance, and they believe blowing up school buses and nursing homes and hospitals is legitimate so long as you are quote unquote occupied. Now, why is it that they believe these things? I can't speculate. We can talk about DEI. We can talk about creating a culture of oppressor and oppressed, and Jews are white. We can talk about those things, but ultimately it's not for me to speculate. And more fundamentally, it's almost irrelevant. It's almost irrelevant.
Okay.
It reminds me of when people...
In a way it is, because who's feeding that brainwashing? It's like a cult. Who's brainwashing them to believe that? At a certain point, like, you can't change the narrative because that's what they were brought up to believe.
It could be. This is unverifiable, so I can't really comment directly on why it is they believe these things. But again, we can talk about that there are certain institutions or programs within Harvard that certainly encourage a similar line of reasoning. The Religion and Public Life Department, the Center for Middle Eastern Studies, they have day after day, week after week, the same old, tired stereotypes and tropes of Israel being a settler colonial state, of there being an illegal occupation, of there being an apartheid regime. So it would stand to reason that when you have professors and faculty and guest lecturers and courses that are being taught with one narrative exclusively, it would stand to reason that you have students in these classrooms who walk away thinking, yeah, this actually makes sense. And so whether it was 40 babies beheaded or 40,000 babies beheaded, it's almost irrelevant. Because Israel is an occupier, an unjust occupier, and therefore we must free Palestine, to use their terms, by any means necessary. And that is a really dangerous line of thinking. And what I was going to say earlier is it's also incredibly, I don't know if racist is the right word, but it totally takes away the agency of Palestinians. It takes away their free will and their ability to discern morality and immorality. To say that they have a right to murder and rape and behead because they're occupied almost says that they don't have a choice. They're not able to think critically about issues because they're occupied, and everything can be blamed on Israel, which is why you have 34 groups of 1,000 Harvard students saying that we put the entire blame on Israel because we can't blame Palestinians for doing anything wrong. Because how can they ever do anything wrong when they're being oppressed? If that attitude was ever accepted, Jews would be raping and murdering and pillaging every German and Polish and Ukrainian.
In history, right?
It's such a monumentously dangerous position to take that has no basis in reality and is so demeaning to Palestinians. But I digress.
What would you want to ask listeners to help with your mission? Or with, I should say, our mission.
Exactly, our mission. Give us a platform. That's number one. By you speaking to me and by me talking to my friends at Harvard, what they are doing is more than Harvard ever has and ever will, which is listening to Jewish students as to what's going on. Speak to them, talk to them, ask them what their last 5 months have been like. Because that's what Harvard isn't doing. That's what the professors aren't doing. That's what the Antisemitism Task Force isn't doing. But that's what you can do. And that's what your listeners can do. Highlight us, platform us, listen to our stories. That's number one. Number two, once you listen, take action. You can email Harvard. These are publicly available email addresses. You can file a Title VI complaint with the Office of Civil Rights and the Division of Civil Rights at both the Department of Education and the Department of Justice. You can, if you have a platform, you can speak out. You can call and go to DC and let your policymakers let them know how disgusted you are. You can tell your alma maters how disgusted you are. But you do have a voice and you do have a platform. When I started this, I wouldn't call it activism, but when I started speaking, I didn't have a platform. I didn't even know how to use social media. I just felt that what was happening was so unacceptable and no one was listening to me that I should just use social media because maybe someone out there will listen. And a week later, I get a call from a Fox News producer citing something that I'd posted on social media. It's my 4 followers.
And good for you.
And within a week, I was on a platform where 1 million to 2 million people listen every day. It's not because I'm so articulate and so brilliant and so thoughtful. It's not. It's because I just spoke up and I just called out what I saw and people started listening. And I do not possess any intellect, any wisdom, any profound powers that other people don't. I'm a regular guy. And if I can do it, then you guys can do it, and you guys can do a hell of a lot better job.
So post this, share this, talk about it, do something. Let's not forget about it. When the war first broke out, I was in Israel. My daughter stayed there in seminary. We came back a week later. And I remember speaking to a lot of my friends that their husbands went to war. And some of my friends that were actually serving as the women that are serving in both parties. The husband and the wife were serving. And she was saying, my biggest fear is that the world is going to forget and it's going to become old news. Yeah. And she's like, just don't forget us, because this is our day to day. This is our life. Don't forget us. And I think that's what you're saying. Yeah, it's nice when it's in the news, when we go to Congress, but don't forget us, because every day we're getting up and we have to go to class. We have to be with these professors. We have to face anti-Semitism. So help us and help the future generation, right? Let's create a safe place for the future generation.
Absolutely.
I want to thank you.
Thank you. And I'll just close by saying that the anger and the dread and the fear even that we had on October 7th, both at the situation happening in Israel and the situation on college campuses, that anger should be a force for positive change because nothing fundamentally has changed on college campuses. If anything, they've gotten worse. So if we can harness the raw emotions that we were feeling on October 7th and we keep those raw emotions with us and use it to animate our activism, use it to animate our calls for justice, we will be a lot more effective because the situation, as I said, has not gotten better. It's only gotten worse. So we should continue to feel angry. And I don't want to end on a depressing note. We should also continue to feel inspired that we are part of such a remarkable group of people, that Am Yisrael Chai, that we have endured this, that this is not new in Jewish history. In a week's time, we'll be around our Passover Seder table, and we'll be reminiscing about all of the groups that have stood against us, that have persecuted us, that have killed us, that have demoralized us. And we will remember that we will get through this, and we will get through this together.
So you're 25 years old. What's your dream? What do you see yourself like when you're 40 years old?
40, to be very happy living on a beach.
Are you doing anything on the beach, or are you just sitting on a beach? Okay.
I'm not even on Twitter anymore. I have no more social media. I'm just on a beach. I am fortunate that I've been given a platform. It's a small platform, but it's a platform nonetheless. And I owe it both to myself, if I can be honest, and to a lesser extent to other people, to use this platform to be a voice. There have been students throughout this horrific ordeal who have told me, both in person and on social media, I don't want my name out there, but I want you to know that so-and-so is happening to me and we need to do something about it. And it's such an honor and it's such a privilege and it's also such a responsibility to have those stories and to have those people rely on. Again, I'm not trying to be a hero. I'm not. Anyone could do this. So in terms of professional aspirations, whatever I do, and I like the idea of public policy or political advocacy if people have any suggestions, but whatever it is, it's going to incorporate the voice that I've been given to stand up and speak out for those who don't necessarily have that voice just yet.
Are your parents looking at you now and saying, oh, he was always doing something like a voice of elementary school, high school, the team?
I can say that they're probably glad that I did my personality to something actually productive and helpful. I was the guy getting sent to the principal's office in middle school. So I think they're more just relieved at this point. Yeah.
Maybe if you were in middle school, you'll be still sent to the principal's office because no one likes hearing. A lot of time, I shouldn't say no one, but people don't like hearing the truth. And when you tell them the truth, you get sent to the principal's office. So maybe...
No comment.
Maybe it's time.
With the respect for my amazing, wonderful middle school teachers, I'm sorry for the hard time I gave them.
Oh, that's sweet. That's sweet. So I wrap up with a two-part question. If there was anyone in the history from Adam and Eve that you can meet, who would that be and what would you ask them?
Wow. Oh my gosh. Putting me on the spot. That's a pretty existential question right there. Anyone from Adam?
Usually people have heroes or something that they ponder, and sometimes usually, but maybe not.
There's a rabbinic figure that I've really been enamored with, and he's actually the background of my phone, the Kutzker Rebbe, Menachem Mendel Morgenstern. He's a misunderstood and tragic figure in Jewish history. He lived in Poland in the 19th century, and he was quite radical in terms of what he expected from the behavior of his followers, and also from the behavior that he expected from the world. He wanted truth more than anything. And ironically, I go to Harvard, and Harvard's motto is Veritas, which is Latin for truth. And how disappointed the Kutzker would be, not just at Harvard, but at a society that has long forgone and forgotten truth and its values. And I don't think I would particularly ask him anything. I think I would just want to listen to him. I think I would just want to be a fly on the wall. And as I said, he's a tragic figure, but he's such an important, fascinating figure. And his words are needed now more than ever. We should all internalize what Kutzker Rebbe taught us, the passion for truth, the quest for authenticity, and it's certainly needed now.
What a beautiful note to end on. Shabbos.
And on the spot. I thought of that on the spot.
Wow, that is so beautiful. I just want to know what made you learn about him so much that you know about him. It's so random, but it's beautiful. Thank you for what you do, and thank you for your voice. And I'm sorry you had to go to the principal office when you were in middle school, but you're paving the road for a lot of us and our future. And we're grateful. I'm grateful for your voice And I think for role modeling, you're half my age, but I could say you're my role model. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Understand. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Please hit that follow button on your favorite podcast app. This way you don't miss an episode and you help us grow. You are part of our growth. We appreciate your support and we hope you choose to listen to us on our next episode. We'd love to hear from our audience. If there's anything you would like us to research, to talk about, please contact us on our website, listeningtounderstand.com. And if there's any insight that you got from this and you want to share with others and you are happy for us to read it out loud on our show, send us your insights. Send us your thoughts. We want to listen to understand. Bye till next time.